Greetings, folks. This is Scott with the Game Audio Institute, and we are continuing our journey as we have been before into scripting inside Unity. And this is going to kind of wrap up the footsteps a little bit. We might have one more that we might do for middleware, but we're going to actually do a little bit of like an extension of the footstep event. When we last left off our heroes, basically what ended up happening is we had a footstep. Our hero was only able to play our footstep randomly from a single thing. What we didn't have is, for example, no randomized pitch. We had no randomized volume, and we didn't really even have the ability to do things like, have left and right, feet effectively. So I'm going to show you one possible approach that we can use to do all of those things. And we'll just sort of take those one at a time. And right now, let's just take a look and see what we have going on with our script. Now, I have actually spent a bit of time and I annotated a bunch of these scripts. All the scripts from the series, in fact, are going to be available to all of our Patreon subscribers and stuff like that. So if you want to get access to these things for free, you can subscribe and we can give you access to these scripts. And like I say, I've done a lot of annotation on these so that they're incredibly detailed as far as like what practically each line does almost. Anyway, so that's just, something that you could potentially get as a little bit of perk for signing up on our Patreon. Otherwise, though, you can just take a screenshot and copy this all yourself. Anyway, so the deal in this case, what you want to do is, if we wanted to do random pitch and random volume, you kind of maybe have an idea about how that works because we've already done randomized pitch in some earlier videos. So let's just basically say where we're going to basically stick this if we're going to do this. What we're going to probably do is we're going to define a float. In this particular case, you're going to define a float for both pitch and one for volume. And the idea ends up being that, we'll be able to set these as random values, essentially. So it's very easy. So we'll say float R&D pitch is equal to pitch equals, right. And then it's going to be random.range. That's going to be our friend that we've had before. So random.range. And then our value range, we're going to set it to 0.75. And then we have to make sure that there's an F. Remember, because that is a floating point number. If you don't put in the F, then it's going to think you're creating a double precision number, which is a very different thing than a floating point number and much less common, actually. And anyway, so random pitch, random.range, 0.75, 1.25. Okay, then the next float that we're going to do is a random volume. So it's very easy. Random vol equals dot range. And we're going to set that over here to the same sort of low range. Remember, though, in case of volume, 1.0 is the highest volume we can actually be at. That's the highest range. So what we're going to do in this case is probably go from, let's say, 0.6F, 0.6F to 1.0F. And we'll go to that and click the semicolon to save all of that. And there we go. So that ends up being the random pitch and random volume of our current situation, basically. So that will be that. Now, how do we end up playing it? Very simple. What we're going to do is we're basically going to get it just before we have to play the clip. Okay? So we're going to go right over here. So we're just basically going to say, okay, remember our thing was called foot source. So we're going to say foot source dot pitch is equal to good old random pitch. And our foot source dot volume, which is another parameter we can, put in here. Then we can just say random volume. And that's how we do it. That's all it takes, basically, in order to be able to make that happen. So I'm not going to quite test that out inside the game. We may do some other things in a little bit here. And there's lots of ways to do this in a much more, in a different kind of way. Right now, what happens is this number is going to replace whatever volume we currently have with a randomized volume. So no matter what volume you've set it at, it won't be in a percentage of that volume. It won't be randomized around that particular percentage of volume. So it's not super fancy, that kind of thing. But this is an example anyway. All right. So Hopefully I've done things correctly and we don't have any mistakes. And I'm not going to test this out because we want to kind of go on to the next sort of step, which is if we wanted to do a left and a right foot, how would we do that? Well, it turns out that our friend, the animation event that we introduced you to, I think episode 1, right? In first version of the first video of our footstep series, we talked about the animation event. Now, you can add animation events in a couple of ways. One of those ways is that you are importing a model into the game. If you have already imported a model into the game, and that model already contains built-in animations, okay? So if the animations are built in to the video game, basically, then what happens is you're going to use this particular interface, and you just basically scroll down here in the inspector, and you'll see curves, events, mask, motion, and import messages. You're looking for the events tab, and it will show up as these sort of 5 different fields here, okay? And then what you're going to do is put in another variable. Now, one thing that's interesting about this animation event is that we already have actually defined what the animation event was, but it was just merely what's called a void. It was just calling the function. It was not passing it any kind of parameter whatsoever. So you can pass a parameter to it if you want to. If you pass a parameter, that parameter can actually be, it's a little bit weird here, but even though it's listing all these things, it can only be one of these. So it can be a float, or it can be an integer, or it can be a string, or it can be an object. And by object, we do not mean game object. We mean more likely some kind of script object, essentially. So a class or a struct or something like that. And again, we'll explain some of those terms later on, but we'll ignore this for now because it's a little too complex to get into. Instead, we'll use the string. And we'll just simply basically go and say, hey, this is our left foot. Our left foot was playing here. Yeah, that's good. And we go and click on the next one over here and put in right for the right foot. And there we go. So that is one interface, by the way, for this animation event. Just to let you know that there's another one. If you happen to have animations that are directly loose inside the game that aren't a part of a model, right? They're not embedded inside a model. Like, for example, over here. One thing's important. You do need to, when you're doing this kind of, exercise of applying things to models, you do have to hit the apply button. So that's very important. So we're going to do that. If we click the walk n button, this is actually an anim file, right? And when you do this, it does, if you create an animation event here, then the interface for those animation events is right up here in the inspector. It shows up in the inspector, doesn't show up in the animation window. So keep that in mind. So those are the two sort of representations of how to do the animation event. So now that we've done that, let's go back to our script and figure out what else we need to do. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually now change our play footstep so that it will now have another variable. Now, this is an input variable, essentially. So in other words, what we're going to do is we're basically going to create an input variable, and it will be a string. A string is just a series of text characters. And we'll just call this string foot. That's all we need to do. So now that we know we're actually going to be using this, and it's a little bit of a tricky thing, by the way. If you define this stuff inside a script and you forget certain things and things are referring to them, you'll get almost immediate compilation errors, if there's an incongruity between the two. But weirdly enough, with animation events, that does not happen, which means that if you, say, have a string and you have and you decide to leave the string out here inside the public void, it would still work, and it would not give any compilation errors. So it's a little bit interesting, kind of a weird issue there. So anyway, we're going to do this and check it out here. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to do some stuff where we can maybe perform a little bit of math magic, if you will, on some of this stuff. Now, we do have a really wide random range, so this is going to sound a little weird and chaotic. The best thing to do would be to, say, have a much more closer range. So let's just maybe do that. That's probably not a bad idea. So let's just make this between, say, 0.85 for our pitch and 1.1 maybe. So that's going to be a lot closer, maybe, and even maybe 90, honestly. Yeah, how about that? So that's going to be a smaller range of pitch, and I think that might be a useful thing to do because what we're going to do is we're actually going to make it so that the left foot is lower in pitch than the right foot. Okay, so we'll give that a try. And again, we can set all these things up before we actually play anything out there, essentially. So that's the idea. So what happens is that we're basically going to go through here. We already get the randomization fish. Okay, right. Okay, so then we go there. And in this case, what we can say is that, and we can actually say our pitch is going to be a little bit, different. In this case, what we want to do is create a check on our string. So we want to say if foot is equal to left, we can perform a function on the foot source pitch. And then else if foot is equal to right, then we shall see what happens. So we'll say if foot is equal to left, do something. Remember, if there's only one thing that you want to have happen, you don't need to put this stuff in the curly brackets. You can just leave it alone. But if you have more than one thing happening, more than one statement happening, definitely going to have to use that in curly brackets. But we don't. We only have one thing. What we're going to do is we're going to actually take the foot source pitch, foot source dot pitch, which we already know has already been assigned to the random pitch before. But now what we're going to do is we're going to modify this and say if foot source pitch is left, then we're going to basically say it is minus equals. Now this is just sort of a shortcut in order to be able to tell the system to take a number and subtract a certain number from it, essentially. So we'll say foot source pitch equals, minus equals, let's say 0.15F. So we're going to subtract that very small amount from the sound, basically, and that's it. Whatever the value is, it's just going to subtract that value from it. And in this particular case, if it's the right foot, we'll just do this exactly the opposite. The opposite is by using the plus sign. So we go here, foot source dot pitch, foot source dot pitch plus equals 1.15, I'd say. Yeah, we'll see what happens, and we'll see how that works. You can annotate it all later, of course. And that will basically work. If, say, if foot is left, then play it slightly lower in pitch. If it works right, then make it slightly higher in pitch, basically. And we'll see if this works or not. Maybe it'll be a little bit weird, but we'll find out. Gonna give it a try. But you'll hear, hopefully, especially in the metal ones, you'll definitely be able to hear the pitch changes. And we'll see if it works. All right, here we go. Moment of truth. All right, so here we go. There it is, right? And there we go. So you could obviously make that difference much less, so it's not super obvious. That's obviously like several semitones higher. But you can hear that when we walk on the metal, it's clearly going from the low pitch to the high pitch for the left and the right. So we have a separate left and right show. Now we could obviously do even more stuff with that. You could do, you could add all kinds of stuff with that. You could make it so that if there's certain kinds of foot actions like sliding your foot or jumping or landing or whatever, you could create all kinds of options and add that to the string. So you could create various kinds of things if for different animations that had different kinds of foot actions, and that those would then be creating or triggering different foot sounds or whatever like that. So you could get really complex things like you might have seen in games like Limbo, where you have lots of different foot actions and stuff that we mentioned before, of course. Anyway, so So, I hope this has helped you figure things out, how to extend the functionality of the footstep script just a little bit more than it was before. If you're interested in giving us advice and letting us know what you'd like to see in this lovely scripting series, let us know. Leave a comment, like and share and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll be seeing you in future ones. But if you can give us some feedback, we would appreciate it a lot, because I'd like to know what you're interested in learning. Okay? All right. We'll see you again next time. Take care. I hope this gets your game audio on. Bye.